Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is, well, it's on the profound human toll and the subsequent life crises that many highly skilled professionals face. These are people who, after years, sometimes decades of contributing here in the U.S., find their lives completely upended by, frankly, the unpredictable and often arbitrary nature of U.S. work visa policies. We're particularly looking at the H1B framework. And the central question really emerging from the material, especially from KJ's very personal account in About Life Choices and Potholes, is this. Does this huge human cost, this visa unpredictability, does it primarily show a critical failure that demands serious policy reform? Or, alternatively, does this struggle actually highlight a more fundamental truth that resilience, dignity, and even our definition of home, maybe they have to be internally defined, independent of these external systems and government red tape?
Right.
So I'll be arguing that this H1B uncertainty is fundamentally a systemic failure. It inflicts deep, unnecessary human costs, and it really demands immediate policy reform.
And I'll be coming at it from a slightly different angle. While, look, the systemic flaws are glaring, I don't think anyone denies that. The crucial lesson I think Kay's specific journey offers us is about the ultimate necessity and, frankly, the power of internal resilience and reinvention. That external collapse, however harsh it felt, it actually served as a catalyst, maybe even a necessary one, for discovering a more durable, self-defined sense of identity and eventually peace.
Okay, well, to really grasp the trauma here, I think we first have to recognize what these visa regulations mean. For professionals who've lived in the U.S. for maybe, 20 years, building careers, paying taxes, mortgages, raising families, these aren't just immigration rules. They function as effectively life policy. And what I mean by life policy is that your stability, your identity, your entire future planning, it's all held hostage by a government stamp, by bureaucratic process. And the core mechanism driving this instability, especially for many skilled immigrants, is the decades-long queue for employment-based green cards, which is just made worse by the per-country caps.
That's an interesting framing, life policy. Though I would frame the result of that policy differently. You see, when that illusion of stability, the one tied completely to an external system, finally collapses, as it did for Kay when her job situation changed unexpectedly, it creates what she calls a pothole moment. Now, this jolt, yes, it's painful, definitely, but perhaps it's necessary. Her story seems to reveal that the life she'd so carefully built in the U.S., while maybe successful on the outside, was perhaps internally fragile because it relied so much on that external validation. The unraveling of her legal status, it forced her to reassess everything, pushing her from a life based on what a system promised to one based on, internal necessity and what she could control.
I see why focusing on the internal strength that comes out of it feels empowering. But let me offer a different perspective on that cost. That strength you're highlighting, it feels like a tax, an unjust tax, levied by a broken system. The instability isn't accidental. It's structurally baked in. I mean, consider the practical reality. An H1B holder loses their job, they have just a 60-day grace period. 60 days to find a new comparable sponsorship or pack up their lives and leave the country. That ticking clock, it absolutely stifles risk-taking. It halts careers in their tracks. And it makes huge life decisions like buying homes, an incredibly precarious gamble. This is the unseen cost, the constant mental strain, the deferred life decisions. Suddenly, years of blood and sweat invested, as Kay puts it, they count for less than that 60-day clock. This structural precarity, I argue, is an unacceptable stripping of dignity rooted in preventable policy failure.
No, I absolutely agree. The 60-day rule and those endless queues are deeply harmful mechanisms. I'm not defending the policy itself. However, the crisis did compel Kay towards proactive reinvention. And that demonstrates, for me, that dignity isn't just granted by policy, it has to be claimed, lived. Her professional identity was, very tightly bound to the corporate success structure, Silicon Valley style. When that disintegrated, she had to pivot. And her move wasn't just, an emotional whim, moving from software engineering, algorithms, to becoming a writer and data storyteller. It looks like a strategic shift. She leveraged her existing technical understanding, her grasp of data and complex systems, and translated it into narrative, into communication. So yes, the system stripped her of her job title, her external status, but it couldn't strip her of her core competence or her ability to redefine herself through her own narrative.
But that massive effort, that strategic reinvention you describe, that's precisely the unjust tax I'm talking about. We shouldn't have to praise the immense strength required just to survive an unjust, unnecessary trauma inflicted by policy. The damage is profound, and I'd argue, in many ways, it is irreversible. Key herself describes the experience as a loss of self, because that professional identity, the very one the U.S. valued and utilized for 2 decades, is fundamentally undermined. We're talking about driving away valuable STEM talent, not because they lacked skill or resilience, but because the foundational trust between the professional and the country they built their life in was shattered by policy chaos. That's a loss for everyone.
Okay, I hear the point about irreversible damage, but I'm not fully convinced it's entirely irreversible, because the core identity Kay seemed to discover in that collapse might actually be more durable than the one she lost. The crisis arguably revealed that the stability they thought they had was, as I suggested earlier, maybe an illusion all along, propped up by external factors. When faced with that chaos, she had that realization: success is not a zip code. This crisis forced her to shed that kind of uncomfortable in-between identity feeling, too American for India, too Indian for America, and rediscover a self that could, remarkably, find comfort in uncertainty. The resilience forged in that fire, that external collapse, it led her to reclaim agency. Her decision to say, screw it and start over. I mean, that's the ultimate act of self-determination, isn't it? Taking control back when the system failed her.
Let's get more specific about the policy mechanisms that violate dignity, though, because it's not just about individual feelings, it's structural. When you have hundreds of thousands of high-skilled professionals stuck in green card queues that can stretch 20, even 30 years, their entire working lives, primarily due to these antiquated per-country caps, their dignity is systematically violated day after day. Policy treats these visas as mere eligibility checkboxes, but it ignores that for the individual, that queue represents years of deferred life, years of questioning their right to belong in the very community where they've put down deep roots. The experience of belonging is lived daily, but the policy arbitrarily denies them the right to just peaceful continuity.
Right, I understand the policy critique and it's valid, but the material, Kay's story, suggests that perhaps true belonging is only really realized when the sheer absurdity of the policy is fully confronted and maybe transcended internally. Kay's journey eventually seems to grant her the emotional clarity to see the system's criteria for what they often are: arbitrary.
Arbitrary, yes, but still immensely powerful in its ability to destroy a life.
Powerful, yes, but also perhaps incredibly weak in its philosophical foundation. I mean, consider the height of her logistical nightmare. These cross-country sprints, Hyderabad to Delhi, trying to secure an expedited tourist visa back to the US during all that travel chaos, mainly because her beloved, apparently quite dramatic dog, Solly, was still in America. And when she finally gets the visa interview, the American official's reason for approving it immediately? According to her account, it was simply for my beloved dog.
That is a powerful, almost comical example of the absurdity.
Exactly. It's absurd. And that single moment where potentially years of professional contribution, taxes paid, community involvement meant less in that instant than the emotional bond with a pet. Well, it highlights the system's profound weakness, its philosophical emptiness in a way. Kay seemed to realize then that the stability she craved was never going to come reliably from Washington, D.C. Her eventual sense of peace and contentment, as she describes it, came later from the simple joys solely by her feet in Mumbai, family meals, reestablishing roots on her own terms. Belonging, as she seems to conclude, is ultimately defined by the life we live, the contributions we make, and the communities we build, independently of what the U.S. government decides on any given day.
Okay. While the absurdity of the dog visa moment is certainly illuminating, and I absolutely acknowledge the profound internal peace Kay achieved, we just cannot conclude that the solution is purely personal transcendence. Focusing solely on internal resilience, while it risks political demobilization, It lets policymakers completely off the hook for these massive structural failures. The primary call to action, I firmly believe, must be systemic. We need human-centric policymaking, policies that actually value continuity and contribution over bureaucratic hurdles. The current system actively drives away essential talent. We are incurring a significant economic cost, a brain drain, by treating highly skilled professionals, often in critical STEM fields, as if they're disposable resources. This isn't just a moral failing, it is a strategic economic detriment to the U.S. We have to honor the decades of investment these professionals have made by reforming things like the per-country caps and eliminating the existential dread caused by rules like the 60-day grace period.
The economic argument is persuasive, I grant you that. And the U.S. undoubtedly suffers from these flawed policies. However, the most profound universal lesson offered by KJ's journey feels more philosophical and ultimately perhaps more durable than policy reform, which can be slow or never come. Policy may or may not change. Life's uncertainty in various forms will always remain. Her story teaches us, I think, that true happiness and stability can't be entirely contingent on external stamps or governmental permissions. She faced the chaos head-on, the logistical nightmare of the move, selling her assets, the sheer force required to relocate an entire life built over decades, and she chose to reclaim her own narrative. She chose, as she puts it in her book, to learn to maneuver around at the pothole or embrace the chaos of the fall.
So perhaps the deepest call to action is for the individual, to internalize the strength to build a life where external forces, no matter how chaotic or unjust, cannot dictate one's fundamental sense of identity or worth.
My stance remains firm. The systemic failure is unavoidable, it's staring us in the face, and we must recognize the immense human cost, the lives caught in this policy crossfire, the trauma inflicted by visa uncertainty, that loss of self, the constant mental strain, the deferred dreams. It's a direct indictment of the existing framework. We can and should admire the immense fortitude required to survive this system, but we absolutely must not romanticize systemic trauma as some kind of necessary catalyst. The goal should be justice, fairness, and continuity for those who have contributed so meaningfully.
And I maintain that KJ's journey powerfully showcases the transformative potential of internal resilience. The collapse of her external system, however painful, led to a necessary internal shift. It proved, at least in her case, that true belonging and peace can be achieved through self-acceptance and the capacity for reinvention. She effectively moved from seeking external validation through a visa to defining her home through her own spirit, her actions, and her re-established community connections.
It's clear that both sides of this debate illuminate crucial aspects. The policy is deeply flawed, arguably economically damaging, and causes real suffering. But the resulting personal stories also teach profound lessons about human strength, adaptation, and the search for meaning.
Indeed, the material really compels us, and perhaps our listeners, to examine where we each place the weight of our own stability. Is it primarily in those external structures, government, career, status, which, as we've seen, can be incredibly fragile? Or is it ultimately found in the internal strength of a self-defined identity, something that perhaps we alone control?
Which perspective offers the most meaningful path forward, especially amidst life's inevitable uncertainties? Well, that is ultimately for the listener to decide.